Hey guys, Alex from LMU Academy here with another Le Mans Ultimate Fix Setup Lap Guide, this time in the BMW M HYBRID at Spa. As always, we'll cover the setup first, then cover each corner in slow time, followed by the pit entry, and then finally put the lap together for you in real time. So first, let's take a look at the setup, and remember that we're using the default setup for the car with some slight changes to the electronics and brakes, which means you can still use this setup and achieve this lap time in any race that forces the fixed setup to be used. Now we set a lap time of 1:59.9 using quali fuel with the medium tyre compound. Taking a look at the traction settings, we're using an overall TC value of 8, TC cut 6, and TC slip 10. Onto the brakes, and we're using a brake bias of 55.0 on the front and 45.0 on the rear. We're using a brake migration of 2.5 to the front, as well as a max pedal force of 100%. Then finally onto the anti-roll bars, and we've got the front set to P2 and the rear set to P3. Now that's covered, let's take a look at each corner in slow time. So for turn 1, we position our car as far to the left as possible to open up the corner, and our braking point is either this 100 meter board here on the left or the overly brown patch of grass near the track surface. Now it's very easy to lock up here, so we need to make sure that after going hard on the brakes initially, that we start to trail off quickly and use our fast downshifting to help get the car slowed down to first gear in time. Now as we turn in for the corner, we need to take a later apex because doing so helps us get the wheel straight sooner, which then gives us a good exit speed leading up to the Eau Rouge Raidillon section. Once we reach the apex, we go back smoothly on the throttle as we straighten up our wheel. Make sure you avoid this red sausage curb on the exit because it can cause the car to bottom out. Now for the Eau Rouge and Raidillon corners, the goal here is to turn our wheel as little as possible so that we can carry as much speed through the corners as possible. We start off by placing our left tyres at the edge of the red and yellow curb in order to open up the corner. Then as we reach the end of that red and yellow curb, we then turn over to the right to meet the next apex. Touching this curb is okay, but try to avoid it if possible because if you hit it too hard, it can throw your car out wide on the next curb, which can invalidate your lap. Once we clear that third curb, we straighten out our wheel as soon as possible. Now for the Lecom section, and our braking point is just before this 100 meter board or just after the orange post here on the left. As we go hard on the brakes down to third gear, we allow the left side tyres to move over the red and yellow curb to open up the next corner. As we reach the apex, we can place our right side tyres onto the green tarmac here, but make sure you keep your left side tyres on the white line or you invalidate the lap. As we clear the apex, we can go back on the throttle slightly, but the key here is not to be too greedy with it because that'll cause you to ruin your entry into the next corner. Now as we turn into the next apex, we can place our right tyre on the red and yellow curb, but make sure you don't go past that because it can cause the car to bottom out and possibly even spin sometimes. Once we reach the apex, we go back on the throttle smoothly, and then we need to bring our car back over to the left as soon as possible to open up the next corner. Once we reach the red and yellow curb, we lift off the throttle and then turn in for the next apex. Now it's best to avoid the green surface here and stick to the red and yellow curb. However, if you do end up hitting the green surface, just try to upshift to fourth gear early because if we touch it in third gear, it'll cause the car's revs to hit the limiter, which can cost us time like we see here. Now for the Bruzel hairpin, our braking point is just as we reach this red motor board on the left. We brake hard initially, but then trail off the brakes as soon as we can down into first gear. Now we need to attack this corner in a kind of V shape, and the easiest way to remember the process is that we turn in and line up our car with this first section of green tarmac. Then as we pass it, we drift slightly outwards and avoid this second section of green tarmac. Then as we reach this third section of green tarmac, we start to turn in. Now we go slowly back on the throttle as we straighten up our wheel, and we need to bring the car back over to the right hand side to open up the next corner. Our braking point here is just as we reach this electronic flag board on the right, and we hold the brake slightly, about 30%, and trail over to the corner apex. Try to avoid touching the curb because it can unsettle the car and lower your exit speed. As we reach the apex, we go back on the throttle and straighten the wheel as soon as possible, then open up the exit by placing the right side tyres on the red and yellow curb. Now before we reach our braking point for the pull-on corner, we upshift early to 6th gear and we place our right tyres as far to the right as possible to open up the corner. Our braking marker is just before this white Toyota board and we brake about 50% down to 5th gear. As you line the car up with the apex, avoid touching the curb because it can unsettle the car. As you feel the car stabilise, go back on the throttle and open up the next corner by placing the right side tyres on the red and yellow curb. Then do the same as you reach the next apex. Again, try to avoid touching that curb on the left. Now for the piff paff section, and our braking point is just as we reach this electronic flag board on the left. We go hard on the brakes down to 3rd gear, and as we reach the apex, try to avoid touching the brown section and keep your right tyre on the red and yellow curb. As we reach this green section of tarmac, we go back on the throttle and straighten up the wheel as soon as we can. Then as we start to turn in for the next apex, we lift off the throttle to help rotate the car. Again, try to avoid touching the brown patch of grass next to the curb. As you reach the apex, go back on the throttle gradually and then open up your exit by placing the right side tyres as far to the right as possible. Now for the next corner, our braking point is just as we reach the blue Goodyear sign on the left. We go on the brakes about 80% down to 3rd gear and then trail off as we reach the apex. Try not to place your right tyre past the red and yellow curb as it can unsettle the car and lower your exit speed. Then as we clear the apex, try to open up your exit by going as far to the left as possible using all the green tarmac on the left. Now this corner is flat out and the turning point is hard to get used to. I found that turning in as we reach the green tarmac on the right gives us more or less the right spot. As you reach the apex, avoid the red and yellow curb because it can unsettle the car. Then as you reach the exit, immediately start turning in for the next bend in the track. Remember to keep your inputs as smooth as possible and turn the wheel as little as possible to maintain as much speed as you can. Now this turn is also flat out, and before we enter it, we need to open up the entry as much as possible by bringing the car over to the right so that the green tarmac lines up with the middle of the car. As you turn in, try to avoid this red and yellow curb as it can unsettle the car. Now before we enter the final chicane, our car should be positioned in the middle of the track and pointed straight ahead towards the grass on the left. Our braking point is just as we cross the white line, and we go hard on the brakes and downshift to 1st gear as soon as possible to avoid locking up. As we reach the corner entry, we place our tyre on the red and yellow curb, then turn in for the apex. Try to avoid this red sausage curb on the right as it can unsettle the car. As you reach the apex, give the car a small amount of throttle and flick the wheel over to the left to line up the next apex. Again, don't be too greedy with the throttle or you can ruin your exit. Once you reach the next apex, go back on the throttle slowly, then straighten the wheel as soon as possible. Again, try to avoid the red sausage curb. Then open up the exit by placing the car over the red and yellow curb so that it lines up with the middle of the car. Now that completes the lap, let's take a look at the pit entry. Now we brake in the same spot and complete the first part of the chicane as normal. But as we reach the apex, we keep the wheel turned to the right and stay off the throttle. Then as we clear the apex, we go back on the throttle slowly and straighten our wheel. Then as you reach the white line, lift off the throttle again and coast the car into the pit lane entry. Then as you clear the wall on your left, go back on the throttle and straighten up the wheel. Keep the car in first gear, and our braking point is just before this red coloured post on the left. Hit the brakes about 60 or 70%, then activate the pit limiter before the white line. So that was a lap at Spa in the BMW M Hybrid, and now we'll put it all together and leave you with the entire lap in real time. Now if you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and if you want to see more lap guides like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel or visit lmuacademy.com.